So I've been, and I'll be very brief. So I've been tasked with saying a little bit by way of wrapping up, and what I want to do is just draw out what I think are a couple of themes of the day that have come out from what has been a really fantastic day of talks and discussion and thought. And I've got three and I think I'm pretty much touching on all the talks. And these are things that I think have been undercurrents here, and I think one of them in particular I think that maybe isn't explicit, that's perhaps worth thinking about it more. So the first one is what I want to call the embeddedness of individuals within populations. And this has come up in a number of different ways, not the least, so Barbara was talking about and Mike was talking about this idea that we can't do personalised medicine without having the population data. So the idea that there is in order to do the personalised medicine, we need to have the population data. So it's in a context. Now, the challenge, the social challenges here, the social challenge that comes out is how we negotiate that embeddedness. How do we deal with that embeddedness? And one of the things, so this particular tension is something that makes me think back to when I was studying political philosophy, and I was studying John Rawls and the theory of justice, and his whole idea is of a social contract and the way in which we come up with principles of justice. And one of the critiques of this liberalist model, the liberalism model of thinking about the individual as contracting in order to make us, and Barbara also mentioned the Hobbes, who famously has a social contract idea of this, the idea that we sort of contract into this collaboration. And Michael Sandel, who was a student of Rawls and who wrote a very interesting book about the limits of liberalism, he called it, core to his critique was this idea that an individual can't be, he called it the unencumbered self. And it's this idea that in order to think about individuals and being embedded in society, we need to think about individuals as distinct from society, as being unencumbered with all the trappings of society. And one of the things that's really struck me about the conversations today is the ways in which we're thinking about personalised medicine and in data and the use of data in terms of undermining that idea of the individual as being unencumbered. So Barbara is talking about solidarity and collective responsibility, and Mike was talking, I'm not going to talk about broad consent, Mike was talking about these ideas about talking about consent in ways, using data without consent in the kind of this social enterprise. And these are all very much ideas about understanding individuals as being part of society in ways in which, and certainly in the field of ethics, we've sort of forgotten about all those sorts of things. So on the one hand, we have discussions about governance and collective action and collective responsibility, and on the other, there is talk about accountability and regulation and consent and control and ownership. And these things seem to me pull in importantly different directions. And this is, I'm sort of recalling Honora O'Neill's Reith lectures on trust in 2002, which I've been spending a lot of time on recently, which really where she draws out that tension, where she says, look, when we force people to tell us all the time what they're doing, we don't trust them. And so we don't give them that kind of license in order to behave. And I think this is something we've been wrestling with today. The contract, the social contract, solidarity. Josh has just mentioned the idea of the covenant. All of these things are ways of understanding that relationship. And I think that really is a very important social challenge for us in the data and the personalised medicine case. Two other things. The first one, and this is an interesting thing I think which Alex suggested to me at lunch, but which I think really does underpin a lot of the structure of this meeting. And this is the idea of recognising complexity and resisting the drive to simplify. I think what our disciplines teach us is to simplify. We think of models and theories and accounts, and these things simplify the system. And one of the things that's clearest when we talk about data, it seems to me, or we talk about the NHS, is it's complex, it's massively complex. The way in which it functions, the way in which the bits interrelate, seem to be something that's really important. And then we think about models, and we do this. We think, I've got a term, right? I've got a term, whether it's covenant or contract or and that's going to capture everything, or consent. And I think the challenge for us and the challenge for society is to resist that, and to recognise the complexity and try to articulate that complexity. And that seems to be a really deep social challenge. The final thing, which we've touched on a little bit, which I think is certainly is again an undercurrent in this, is commercialisation and health. This is the sort of oil and water thing, right? And there's a lot of sort of undertone. I've noticed a lot, and I think about this. It's quite striking about how we're sceptical. The public are sceptical of commercial interests. I think clinicians, by and large, are sceptical of commercial interests, and yet the ways that this market system that we live in and are very comfortable with drives a lot of this. Now, how much it can drive and how much we couldn't do without it is another matter, and how we go about regulating it and constraining it in various ways seems to be something that's really important. But it seems, again, one of these things that is worth naming. It's worth naming and worth investigating why it is that we think there is this sort of prejudice against profit or prejudice against commercialisation. Now, I'm with everybody else in certain respects about this, but it does seem to me it's important. It's an important theme that's come out of this that perhaps is a little bit worth thinking about. Thanks.